Does completely dominating your opponents in every single aspect of the game sound like a lot of fun? Well, this is a guide to how to do exactly that with the Harkonnen. When it comes to the Councilors, you actually have two different ways to go. I actually recommend that you pick Favor out the Harkonnen. The oppression requirement for the first two bonuses should be up all the time. If you're not using oppression as Harkonnen, you're probably doing it wrong. And 10% influence along with 100% agent recruitment speed is huge. The 10 influence upon killing rebels is going to be situational, but you will be killing rebels, so that's basically just free influence right there. So I think this is a pretty strong pick. The other strong pick, I think, no matter how you are going to play your game as a Harkonnen, is Raban Harkonnen. The additional militia slot makes it a lot easier to actually defend your villages, but it's also a 5% village resource production bonus because you have this faction bonus. So easier to defend, more production in your villages, and it's a passive bonus that you don't actually need to do anything for. The oppression duration is increased as well, just a little bit of convenience, but of course you will be using oppression all the time, so it's going to be pretty convenient and nice to have this. Now, I do also think that Iakin Nefut is a pretty decent alternative if you don't want to bother with the more complicated Fate Rautha Harkonnen. Getting your military unit cost refunded in case you lose any is pretty strong, and it also allows for kind of more suicidal type of attacks on the enemy, and the 50% combat drugs mission cost reduction is also pretty straightforward and pretty convenient. But all in all, you should probably not be throwing all your units away all the time. So it's a little doubtful that this is actually the optimal pick, but it's definitely a straightforward and strong pick as well. Now, I don't necessarily think that Peter de Vries is a very good pick unless you're actively going to use all that intel that you can produce with him. Having to place your stealth probes in the enemy territory and kind of babysit them is going to be a little bit annoying, if you ask me. It can be really strong. You can stack up your intel production to a very high level by doing this. But once again, I think the other choices are a little bit less of a gamble, require less micromanagement, and overall are therefore stronger. When you get into the game, pause, make sure you find your Ornithopter, send it to the spies, train a second Ornithopter, train 2 troopers, and then go trade with the Harkonnen. Make sure you get the research agreement first, trade with them, confirm, then pause the game for a moment and pause it again for it to come through, and then trade again for the other trade agreement to get some additional Solari up and running. Only do this with the Atreides because the other factions will give you a debuff to your authority production, and that's not what you want in the early game. Once you conquer your first village, make sure you pause the game and start building a refinery as soon as you can over there. The second thing you should be doing once you unlock that first village is researching local dialect studies as well as composite materials. This will help you to conquer more villages quicker, and this will make sure that everything you're going to be building in your villages is going to be a lot cheaper and you will be building a lot. After that, make sure you kind of scout out. Ideally, you would have already discovered a minerals deposit next to your starting location. There's typically one very close by, and ideally that's the second village that you go after in terms of expansion. When your harvester is done, make sure you put it on auto recall, make sure that you deploy it, but do not crew it. Instead, start building militia in your village in order to get the 20% bonus to all your production in the village, including the ones from your harvester. Now, on top of that, you are going to want to build a plascrete facility in your village because you are going to need all the plascrete you can get. Around this time, you should also have enough authority to start thinking about capturing your second village. Now, ideally, this is going to be the village that has the mineral deposits, but any village that is on your way to your second spice field is a valid target as well. Now, don't wait until you actually have enough authority. Just send your units in advance, because by the time they will actually have conquered the village, you should have enough to capture it. Around this time, you will have also completed your first two research items, and you want to go for the advanced engineering next. Now, this is going to give you a 5% research production in villages per building on an extra slot. You're going to have a lot of those, so make sure you unlock that early. After that, it's a little bit up to your personal preference, but I suggest going for the water cellar context next. That will allow you to field a larger army quicker, as well as make sure you can expand just a little bit faster. Now, after that, I really recommend that you also go for survival training, just to make sure you can beef up your army just a little bit. As always, once you get your first agent, make sure you put it into the Arrakis infiltration. That will actually allow you to start researching these little events around the map. Prioritize those that will actually give you technology, because that will give you a huge boost in the early game. But if you have any other options on your map and you don't have any technology options, just make sure you're always researching one of the events around the map as long as you have any of them available. Once you get access to your second village, start making a plascrete factory once again. You are going to need all that plascrete you can get, and start training some militia once again to get the resource production boost. Around this time, turn your attention back to your first village. What you want to do over there is actually build a recruitment office for additional manpower production. Now, on top of that, what you do want to start doing now is enable the oppression. That will actually triple the resource production over here. As you can see, we're now producing a giant amount of resources on top of actually producing this building really fast. Now, as soon as this runs out, there will be a chance that this village rebels, so that's also why you want to station your units close to it, especially if it's not in range of your HQ. So these two villages in this example could actually be defended almost entirely by the HQ itself, but anything further away will actually need your unit support. Now, in order to make that a little bit easier, once you get the amount of money to do so, you should also consider building a third unit, and that should probably be a gunner to mix up your army a little bit, and that should be helped by the fact that you're now producing a huge amount of manpower production in this village. Your second agent should be going into the Arrakis infiltration as well. More authority is always a good thing, and as long as you have that option, you should definitely go for that. So after this, your agents should probably go into either the Space and Guild or into the Coam production. Solari is good, manpower is good, influence is also good, but not necessarily a priority in the early stages of the game. However, once you get any neighbors close to you and that start interfering with you, putting an agent on counterintelligence is a very valid option as well. Now, around this time, you should probably be in a good position to have enough authority and enough water to start expanding towards your second spice village, and that should be fairly close to your base as well. Typically there's one right next to your base, and then there should be another one 2 zones away from your starting village as well. And make sure you capture that, and of course once you get it, first build a refinery and then build another plascrete factory. We're getting to the mid-game now, and that means that in terms of technology, you're going to have to make some choices. If you have any interest in taking a spying route, you will definitely want to take intelligence network and then spying logistic. The 100% agent recruitment speed is going to be a massive buff, and if you didn't take the counselor that already gave you that buff, you are definitely going to want to take this. If you already did take that counselor, you can double up on the recruitment speed buff. So either way, it's going to be really good if that's the route you want to take. If you are going for a more economic type of game, you can either go for the classic route, modular parts and Grind Explain. That gives you the additional crew in your harvesters and the spice silos building along with that. Or alternatively, you can actually go for the defense systems. Now, actually, I really like this route because this gives you an additional militia slot. By itself, it's not that interesting, but remember that militia slot is going to give us a flat 5% bonus, assuming we actually use that slot, to all the production we are doing in that village. And on top of that, it's going to make you a less attractive target for the opponents to attack, so it's kind of a win-win in that regard. But even if you take the defense systems, going for the modular parts and Grind Explain after that is perfectly valid. And even the energy markets, if you have a lot of fuel cells to go around, can be a very solid choice as well, because the Solari production is very interesting as well, because as you can see, the more buildings you have, you will want to scale that up a little bit. Unless you have a very good reason to deviate from this, the third building in the second village should be a fuel cell factory. Now, as you can see, I'm currently building this in my third village as a first building. That's not entirely optimal, but I did actually went for the research hub in the second village because I have this specific village bonus. So situations like that might make you deviate from the default path, and always keep that in mind. It's not always the case that you should always follow a very strict build order, but think about what your situation is and what makes the most sense. Either way, make sure you get that refinery up as soon as you can. When it comes to Landsraad, you are actually not in a bad position. You don't have as many votes as the Atreides, but you do get 80 bonus votes for free, and that should allow you to get some of the votes in your favor. Now, typically, I recommend going into one of the votes full force rather than trying to spread your votes across many of them, because that's generally speaking the best way to actually get what you want. Now, anything early game or in the mid game that allows you to expand your villages or territory faster is typically good. In this case, I have both the authority production up and running as well as the 50% building cost reduction. I do think this is one of the strongest things to get early in the game. Don't focus on things like military, etc. That's just not going to help you that much. Once you reach 2k hegemony, you want to start building in your main base as well. Now, given the layout of the Harkonnen base, I recommend that you reserve one of the 3 building districts for the military buildings. You reserve one of those 3 building districts for the statecraft buildings, and then you should start out with building in the single district building a research center. Now this will give you a huge boost to your research overall. It'll also allow you to get the second bonus on the economy side for the yellow buildings as well. That's a 10% Solari production. And the only reason to deviate from this specific strategy is if you are going for a hegemony win. Now the Harkonnen are not necessarily the best faction to do that with, but you can. But generally speaking, I think the bonuses on the 3 building districts for the military as well as the statecraft are simply better than the economy alternative. So this is my recommendation. 3 building district for military, 3 building district for statecraft, and then a 1 building and 2 building district for economy, and that leaves you the other 2 building district for whatever buildings you have left. Now, if you've played your Harkonnen right, you can probably win the game with the zones you currently have, if you build them up right. What you want to be doing is making sure you have the maintenance centers in a central location, so they cover all your zones. You have plascrete factories wherever you can in order to make sure you can actually build up all these zones up to 4 or 5 buildings, and you want some strategically placed airfields around so you can easily defend this, not just against your enemy, but also because you will be rotating these oppression abilities on your villages in such a way that you can always have an army near and don't have 3 rebellions taking place across your entire zone, because that can cripple you. So you do need to be a little bit careful, but if you do this, you will get a massive boost to your production. You will have all the spice field that you will ever need. All in all, there's pretty much no way of stopping you if you do this right. Now, of course, there's different wins that you can go for. You can just sit here, farm the rebellions for influence, and go for a diplomatic win that way, although the Atreides might give you a hard time on that. You could also just sit here and go for an assassination win. That's a very viable strategy for the Harkonnen at this point. It's not like anyone is going to take over your zones, because you have these militia everywhere. You have a pretty solid defense going anyway, so good luck trying to conquer you the hard way. So sitting back and doing the assassination thing is definitely a go. But of course, you can always go down the military path as well. And all of these abilities are very strong, but specifically the central command ability is really strong. That the bloodbath on all your units really adds up. Now, it's pretty obvious that if you want to go for a assassination victory or a political victory, then the statecraft area is a pretty good way to go in terms of technology. If you want to go for military victory, of course, the military technologies. And if you want to go for a hegemony victory, then going for the economy is a pretty good way to go. However, the specific Harkonnen technologies that are cruel reputation, instill fear, martial economy, and central command are all very powerful and all very much geared to running a big army. And if you have a big army, that actually makes it a lot easier just to conquer your opponents as well. Now, specifically instill fear makes it interesting to pillage villages around you, which makes it cheaper to annex them later on. Cruel Reputation is a temporary debuff to a village that actually makes it easier to capture, so that's very powerful if you combine it with smart use of operations. And central command is basically just a power up of all your units. Whenever anything dies, they will get a buff and make them even more powerful. Martial economy is a little bit more straightforward. Having a huge reduction on the Solari upkeep as well as the Solari cost makes it a lot easier to run a large army, but also makes it a lot easier to rebuild that army if you throw it at your opponent, end up losing most of your units, and just rebuild them in the process. It's a lot easier for you to rebuild your army than it is for your opponent, so just throwing wave after wave at them is a very viable tactic to work with. From this point on, it's pretty straightforward. You keep doing what you were already doing, you slowly expand your zones, you keep building them up to the max, you keep making sure you use your oppression in appropriate villages, make sure you quash any rebellions that come in your way, and once you're ready, take the fight to your opponent either through espionage or through military domination. Now, of course, you can easily use the espionage as a Harkonnen as well, especially once you reach 5k or 10k hegemony, but you don't actually really need that on top of the raw power that you already have. But hey, it's fun, so why not? I hope you enjoyed this guide. Make sure if you have any additions or suggestions in the comments, leave them behind, and like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this.